Hello and a warm welcome from DD India. I am Amit Mukherjee and you're watching Connecting the Dots, the show that gets into a deep dive, identifies and connects the dots to get you the big picture of a raging global issue. Now, the migration and refugee crisis has become a raging issue that the world is facing today. In this episode, we take a look at the deepening crisis of the global exodus of displaced migrants, refugees, and asylum seekers. We will discuss the causes and compulsions that are forcing natives to become refugees. As millions of people across the globe are being displaced due to raging conflicts with desires to survive with dignity and escape the wrath of nature's fury, we explore the worlds of those ill-fated people struck by bad circumstances and are leaving behind their places of origin in search of a better tomorrow. So who are these refugees? Now, refugees are those who have been forced to leave their country in order to escape war, persecution, hunger, or death. This definition of refugee originates from the 1951 Refugee Convention, in which a refugee is defined as someone who has well-founded fear of persecution for reasons of race, religion, nationality, political opinion, or membership in a particular social group. Also, this whole process of migration, we need to understand what's the difference between refugee and an asylum seeker. Now, a refugee is someone who has been forced to flee his or her country because of persecution or violence, whereas an asylum seeker is a person who is in the process of claiming protection in another country. Now, once an asylum claim is recognized by a host country, the asylum seeker can live in that country as a refugee. Millions of people have been compelled to knock the doors of countries in Europe, America, and Asia as natural calamities, conflicts, and ethnic violence have forced them to vacate their places of origin. According to the United Nations, the number of forcibly displaced people around the world has currently reached a record 114 million, up by a whopping 4 million from May this year. Now, in addition to unresolved conflicts in countries like Ukraine, new conflicts have erupted in the Middle East, Sudan, Armenia, and Myanmar in recent months, triggering more displacements. According to UN estimates, the war in Sudan has driven approximately 6 million people out of their homes. Violence continues in eastern part of Congo, where about 1.5 million people have been displaced this year. Also, fightings and violations of human rights are widespread in Africa's Sahel region, forcing people to flee their homes. For some, even Mother Nature has not been kind. Floods, droughts, and other natural calamities has forced them out of their homeland. For instance, climate emergencies coupled with conflicts have forced nearly 1 million people out of their homes in Somalia this year. Also, nearly 500,000 people have been displaced this year due to violence in Myanmar. The humanitarian emergency in South Caucasus has forced hundreds of thousands of refugees to flee to Armenia. As per UN reports, an average of 15,000 people are arriving per day, with a peak of 40,000 refugees entering the country on September 27, 2023. The total number of new arrivals now constitutes 3.3% of the total Armenian population. Now, this means that 1 out of every 30 people in the country is a migrant. Before this crisis emerged, there were already 35,000 refugees and asylum seekers who were living in Armenia. So as people across the globe continue to flee their homelands due to raging conflicts, calamities, and fear of persecution, here's a look at the top refugee crisis of 2023. The humanitarian crisis in the Central African Republic reached its 10th anniversary in 2022, a period marked by bouts of sectarian violence that have displaced over 1 million people. This escalation in violence has continued since the nation gained independence from France in 1960. The violence has made it increasingly dangerous for Central Africans to live in the country and for humanitarian organizations to work there. Now, for the last several decades, a cycle of crisis in Somalia has been fueled by drought, floods, conflict, and hunger. This concern has been there for more than 35 years in Somalia, as well as in the neighboring countries. Somalia is at the epicenter of the current crisis of Horn of Africa, which could lead to a new famine being declared in the region. Even if it doesn't, the UN still estimates that the effects could be similar to the country's 2011 famine. Sudan is the 5th largest country of asylum for refugees. There has been an increase of about 50,000 additional refugees in this African country compared to last year. The Democratic Republic of the Congo remains one of the world's largest forgotten humanitarian crises. Combining refugees and internally displaced persons, or IDPs, the country's displacement numbers are the highest in Africa. This includes nearly 1 million refugees. In tandem with this, Congo is also a large host community for refugees from neighboring countries. Now, South Sudan, the world's youngest nation, is also reeling under major refugee crisis. Over 4 million South Sudanese have been forced from their homes, with 2.3 million of those having to leave the country entirely. The migration of the Rohingyas, Myanmar's ethnic minorities, has continued for many years. Starting from August 2017, over 1.1 million Rohingyas fled the ongoing violence in the Myanmar's Rakhine state. Rohingyas are fleeing to Muslim-majority Bangladesh or entering into Malaysia, Indonesia, as well as Thailand in rickety wooden boats. Thousands of Rohingyas have arrived in Indonesia's Aceh province in recent times. Many Rohingyas are living in Bangladesh's Cox's Bazar, the world's largest refugee camp. Now, along with the UN agencies, more than 130 local, national, and international non-profit organizations have supported the Bangladesh government to accommodate these influx of refugees. Safety and security remain serious concerns for these Rohingyas living in Cox's Bazar, where their informal housing is often destroyed in season's floods and fires. The ongoing humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan consistently makes it one of the top countries of origin for refugees. Roughly 1 in 10, that is 2.8 billion refugees, are Afghan by birth. More than 88% of Afghan refugees are living in neighboring Pakistan and Iran. Of those Afghans still living in their home country, about 2/3 are in areas directly affected by the conflict. Now, this conflict continues to prompt internal displacement. The problem is further compounded by the limited capacity of infrastructure, government, and humanitarian agencies to deal with the impact of frequent natural disasters, including floods, landslides, earthquakes, and droughts. Now, the conflict in Ukraine led to major humanitarian crisis, including 5.4 million refugees. 16% of the current global refugee population is Ukrainian. Now, this exceeded the United Nations' initial estimate that 4 million Ukrainians, nearly 10% of the country's population, would be displaced as a result of conflict. Global migration in the wake of decades-old Syrian crisis accounts for more than 25% of the total global refugee population. Around 7 million Syrians have sought refuge primarily in Lebanon, Jordan, Iraq, Egypt, and Turkey. The number of displaced Syrians in their country matches the number of refugees. Around 3 million people are still in inaccessible and besieged areas. Now, the European refugee crisis of 2015, when more than 1 billion refugees and asylum seekers arrived in Europe from Syria and elsewhere in the Middle East and Africa, has long since abated. But the recent surge in migration to Europe using the often dangerous and sometimes deadly crossings of the Mediterranean Sea and the English Channel is once again raising concerns and tensions across the European Union. As Europe grapples with the impact of migration crisis, A tiny island called Lampedusa has emerged as a vivid example of how big the problem is. Now, nearly 12,000 people, mostly African migrants, landed on the Mediterranean island in search of a better life. Now, the interesting fact is that the native population of this island is about 6,000 people. Now, the arrival of nearly 12,000 migrants is causing serious issues for the local population. The issues range from livelihood problems to overcrowding to health and sanitation issues for the native populations. Also recently, the Italian Coast Guards rescued 40 migrants stranded on rocks off Lampedusa after a migrant boat wrecked. The wreck killed a 2-year-old girl and 8 people went missing. Now, amidst the growing migrant crisis, Italy has come to a deal with Albania. According to the agreement, Italy will build 2 migrant reception and detention camps in Albania to accommodate 3,000 migrants. This is the first such scheme for a non-EU country to accept migrants on behalf of an EU nation. The move is a part of the bloc-wide campaign to crack down on irregular immigration.
Regarding the agreement with Albania, I think it is a very innovative and very intelligent agreement. And I think that this agreement was received with a lot of interest from other European partners, and so obviously it depends on our ability to make it function in the best possible way. But I think it can be an example to be taken and replicated, especially if it functions well from this point of view.
Meanwhile, Amnesty International and other right groups have criticized this deal. Now, meanwhile, with mass exodus happening from the conflict, poverty and calamity-ridden pockets, here are some facts about the recent applications for asylum reported by the European Union. In September 2023, EU countries received some 108,000 asylum applications. This is the highest since the refugee crisis of 2015 and 16. Now, if the current trends continue, EU expects that it will receive more than 1 million asylum applications by the end of 2023. Syrians continue to submit highest number of applications so far. Turkish applications soared and now ranked second. Germany maintains its position as a leading destination for asylum seekers in the EU and received more than a quarter of all the applications lodged in the European Union. Now, migrations have been an accepted phenomenon, with many countries across the globe, especially in Europe and America, allowing legal movement of people based on their needs. Now that the countries are allowing foreign migrants into their territories, what are the impacts of migration? Firstly, pressure on public services such as schools, housing, healthcare rise. Overcrowding becomes a new problem. Language and cultural barriers come up with foreigners with the local population. With increased population, there is an increase in the level of pollution and sanitation becomes an issue. The pressure on the natural resources also rise. Some areas in Europe has also seen racial tensions and violence, with migrants becoming a part of their territory. Health threats of host nations also increase due to sanitation issues and often even disease vectors borne by members of foreign population. Now, Germany, which took in refugees since 2015, is now reviewing its refugee policy. Now, with many cities overwhelmed by the number of migrants, the government has now announced changes. Chancellor Olaf Scholz seeks to reduce the number of asylum seekers. He agreed to a tougher immigration policy and new funding for refugees. The decision was taken after hours of talks with the heads of 16 German states.
It's our goal that asylum requests and hearing of the people seeking protection take place at the initial reception center. I believe this is a historic moment as we sit here. In light of a huge challenge with very large number of migrants and irregular migration, we have managed for all levels of the state to closely cooperate, which is necessary. People expect this of us.
Now, benefits for refugees are more generous in Germany than in many other European Union countries. Conservative politicians have described this as a pull factor attracting refugees to Germany and have suggested paying out less or even stop cash to the new arrivals. While many migrants choose to leave their countries in a bid to escape the ongoing conflict, an increasing number of migrants are forced to leave their homes for a complex combination of factors. Now, these include lack of healthcare, education, water, food, housing, and factors triggered by environmental degradation and climate change. Now, the US, for instance, is facing migrant crisis, with Mexicans trying to cross over into the country in search of better opportunities. Now, besides a deluge of migrants from Mexico, the US is also facing pressure from other Latin American countries. In a recent move, Colombian President Gustavo Petro said that he proposed to the United States that it pays an economic stabilization bonus to Venezuelan migrants who stop in Colombia en route to the US. Now, during a meeting with Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro in Caracas, Petro said an agreement with the United States on migration must be reached. Now, close to 2.8 million Venezuelans live in Colombia, part of an exodus of over 7 million people who have left the country since 2017 because of its prolonged economic crisis. The issue of displaced refugees and asylum seekers are now triggering fresh confrontations amongst nations. Now, Finland, for instance, a member of the European Union and NATO military alliance, closed 4 crossings on its borders with Russia a few days back. The move is aimed to halt the flow of asylum seekers. Now, Helsinki has accused Russian authorities of funneling migrants to the crossing in retaliation to its decision to increase defense cooperation with the United States. But Moscow has dismissed the accusations. Now, the Kremlin said the move reflected Helsinki's adoption of an anti-Russian stance. Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov said, and I quote, "We do not accept such accusations. Border crossings are used by those who have a legal right to do so, and in this regard, our border guards fully comply with all their official instructions. And if they try to find some far-fetched reasons, then again, we do not accept such accusations against us here." Now, here are some more interesting facts. The wealthiest countries host just 24% of the world's refugees. The remaining 76% are hosted by poor, low, and middle-income countries. Turkey is the single biggest host country for refugees. Most refugees living in Turkey come from Syria. Over half of refugees come from 3 countries globally. 52% of all refugees in the world were displaced from just 3 countries: Syria, Afghanistan, and Ukraine. There is an international agreement to protect refugees. 149 countries have agreed to provide refugees with protection under the 1951 Refugee Convention. Seeking asylum is a universal human right. Refugees' right to seek asylum in another country is included in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, alongside the right to fair trial and freedom of expression. News coverage of refugees often focus on those making long journeys to reach the US or Europe, but most refugees live in places immediately bordering their home country. Now, for instance, Jordan hosts the 2nd highest number of refugees per capita in the world, hosting more than 2 million registered Palestinian refugees and over 500,000 individuals of other nationalities, including people from Syria, Iraq, Yemen, and Somalia. So as the exodus from different pockets of the world continues due to conflicts and calamities, migrants find themselves in vulnerable situations. The circumstances in which they travel, or the conditions and acceptability issues they face on arrival due to cultural, social, and of course economic divides are sometimes heart-wrenching. Now, that's all in this edition of Connecting the Dots. A big thanks from all of us in the newsroom for watching DD India. Take care and stay safe.